definitely appreciate it. And I'm glad I could still be on. I'm in Florida, on the east coast of Florida. And it was pretty wild last night. I didn't know if I was going to even have internet today. So my shutters are still down, so it's quite dark in my house. But luckily, I have internet and we're ready to go. So let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, and everyone can see my screen. All right, so today I'm going to talk a little bit about unlocking hidden profits and how you can grow your portfolio with really no extra costs. And I say this as somebody who has done it myself. Um, this is myself, me and my husband, Mark, and we're apartment owner operators. Born and raised in California. We moved out to Florida about 2 years ago after having to homeschool my kids for a number of years. We were ready for a fresh start. So we moved to Florida and we've slowly been growing our portfolio actually out in Florida. This is our first building up on top here that we bought in Florida. And we just have now 36 units left. We had about 100 units in San Diego. And this is our, on the bottom left here, this is actually our last building that we're selling, moving to a state with that has more landlord friendly regulations, I would say, and really happy to do so. So we've been buying lots of buildings. I'm actually under contract with 3 new properties. And so I feel your pain when it comes to growing your asset values, right? A lot of people want to buy these value add apartments. And you could even say this one property on the top here is a value add apartment. But maybe you don't have the money to put in right away, right? Maybe you don't have the money to remodel the units, replace the kitchens, but you do want to get started and you want to add value, but you don't have the capital necessarily immediately to do so. You know, we recognized in our San Diego portfolio, there was a problem. One day I was actually sitting around the kitchen table with my husband and I was saying, these water costs have gone through the roof. They're really starting to eat into our profits. What really kind of sealed the deal for us was an incident that happened with one of our residents. But I want everyone to consider, you know, just think about kind of tenant behavior when it comes to water use. I always use this example, maybe it's just me, but it seems like a lot of people I talk to have the same kind of, behavior. Let's say you go to a hotel, right? And your shirt's a little wrinkly. What are you doing? Are you pulling out the iron? Or are you going into the bathroom, hanging your shirt up near the shower, turning on the hot water and letting it go? And you do that because the water comes with the cost of your hotel room. And so if you think about it, though, our tenants act the exact same way, right? Unless they're paying for their water, they don't really think about the use. And this leads into what happened when we knew we had a bigger problem. I had a tenant call in with a complaint saying her neighbor was leaving her water on all day. But when we got our on-site manager in there to find out, yes, she was leaving her water on because her dog had anxiety. She would leave the shower on while she was away at work because she didn't want her dog to bark while she was away and upset the neighbors. But when you're footing the bill, you have to do something. And so we had heard of something called RUBS, and this is not a problem that's unfamiliar to a lot of small property owners like myself. Utilities are your third largest expense. Water costs have increased over 75% over the last decade. They're continuing to rise. You can only raise your rent a certain amount, right? You cannot continue to raise your rent to cover the cost of utilities without kind of losing some of your competitiveness within the market. The big owners, right, the big institutional players, they use utility billing service providers. They transfer that cost to the residents with either submeters or ratio utility billing. But the problem is that's not necessarily available to small owners. So I went to all the big companies. I went to the Conservice, the Mittal, the Entrada. I went to all these guys and asked them, hey, help us with our utility billing. And what did they all say? I'm sorry, you're too small. your portfolio really needs to be over 1,000 units for us to take you on as a client, which is pretty upsetting. We're growing our portfolio, but 1,000 units is a pretty big number to get to without some institutional capital in there. So after getting turned away, I was working in the operations with my husband while I was going to grad school. And after I got out of grad school, I said, you know what, this operations is really not my cup of tea. It's hard. I mean, if you guys are all owner operators, it's hard, right? Between bed bugs and maintenance crews, and there's a lot of things to contend with. My husband said, well, we need to get this water bill handled. No one will help us. Why don't you go backdoor the service? Why don't you go work for one of these guys and see what they're doing, find out what they're doing, find out what you can bring back, and hopefully by default, they'll take you on as a client and take us on as a client. And I said, oh, that's not a bad idea. So that's what I did. I went to go work for a company. Now they're actually just rebranded recently, called Multifamily Utility Company. We were, making 100,000 a year when I started. I think I was employee number 4. That was actually the first 4 employees there. And we took that company from 100,000 to 20 million. And I learned firsthand exactly, how to do the utility billing. I became an expert in utility billing, and I discovered there's a bigger secret to utility billing. And so not only did I discover the secret, but yes, they took us on by default as a client. We implemented this on our first 36 unit property, which was one of the ones pictured, our last property we still have for sale in California. They took us on, and it was bigger of a impact than I even anticipated, because you hear it from the utility billing side. Yes, your residents are going to conserve. Yes, you're going to have more tenant accountability. All these things do happen. But really, the secret behind utility billing is something a little bit different. And so, like I said, I'm Tiffany Mittal. I'm a multifamily owner operator. I'm the founder of a company called Utility Ranger that helps owners increase value of their portfolio, of their property, using utility billing. Being in the multifamily space for about 15 years now, and in utility billing for about 11 of those. We're really out to democratize the space of not only utility billing, but prop tech, and really make this available for the everyday mom and pop owner, which really makes up about half the multifamily supply in the US, but largely is ignored by prop tech companies because of the size of their portfolio. And I said, well, no longer is this going to be the case. So I'm going to make a product that are for owners and operators and people just like me, and hopefully just like you. But the real secret behind utility billing is forced appreciation. And what I mean by that is, when you implement a program like utility billing, that is hitting your 3rd largest expense. That has a direct impact to your net operating income. And we know that your net operating income has a direct impact to your value. So I developed a framework called the Rubs to Riches framework. It can be used for really just growing your portfolio. It's a mechanism for apartment owners to grow their portfolios and their profits. So the first part of this is split. What can tenants pay for? One question you ask yourself is, what is an occupant dependent expense? Utilities, trash, pest control, cable, Wi-Fi, surprisingly, is one that a lot of people aren't really doing in the smaller market, but managed Wi-Fi is growing in popularity. Amenity fees, electric car charging, and actually tenant insurance as well. And to implement something like this, you actually have to the first thing is you have to do a 30-day notice really across your portfolio, and also introduce this with introductory letters to your tenants, promoting this as a conservation measure. And once you get the notices out there, you can really get the program going. So tenants use less of what they pay for. It's back to that kind of hotel kind of concept, right? You typically will see about a 20% savings from overall consumption. That is my husband, when we first implemented this, he was so concerned that we were going to get a flurry of move outs. People were going to be upset that we were going to start charging for utilities. And instead, we didn't get a flurry of move outs. We got a flurry of maintenance requests, running toilets, leaky faucets. All of a sudden, everybody had a maintenance request when they probably had that before we started the billing, but they just don't want you in your unit. So they'll ignore the runny toilet, which is a $5 flapper most of the time. They'll ignore the leaky faucet. But once you give them a bill, they're not going to ignore that anymore. They also don't use those devices or water using devices, whether it's dishwashers and clothing washers. They use less of those, or they don't run a dishwasher with one dish in there when they're paying for the water. So it's a slight modification of behavior, and that's true sustainability. If you think about it as a whole, sustainability only works if you can modify the behaviors of people in a sustainable way. So giving your tenants a bill has a slight modification of behavior over time in a sustainable way that changes your overall consumption at the property. So oftentimes the residents, they don't report these leaks, and it's more along the lines of, they may know it's there, but they don't want you in their unit. They don't want you to see maybe the cat that they're hiding. They don't want you to see maybe you have unauthorized people in the unit. I mean, I've seen it all. I've even seen grow houses and closets that shouldn't be there. I mean, I've really seen it all. But once they pay for it, they're more than willing to let you in and deal with those right on. So that way you don't have secondary damage. We always have the tenant with the leaky faucet that is now, really the leak has gone down into the bathroom cabinet. Now you got to rip out the entire bathroom cabinet upon move out. So you're preventing it from the start and preventing any kind of secondary damage as well. Once you start billing your tenants for utilities, that forced appreciation piece kicks in. So I call this NOI hacking. Everyone's heard of like the BRRRR strategy, right? What are they? It's buy, renovate, or what is it? Buy, renovate, rent, repeat, or refinance, repeat. Well, there's one other piece in there, right? Because maybe you can't renovate, maybe you don't have the capital to renovate. So these NOI hacking are a way to generate additional streams of revenue by reducing both your operating expenses and generating additional revenue streams. So your property's valuation is dependent upon your NOI, which I know the last speaker just spoke directly regarding your NOI, your net operating income divided by your cap rate. And your cap rates typically go right around the interest rates, maybe a little bit higher than the interest rates. But if you look at this kind of big impact, that's what it had on our property in San Diego. And I'll show you what those numbers look like in just a minute. But once your property value really grows from implementing a NOI hacking strategy like a utility billing program for your residents, you can use that increased property value to refinance, pull cash out, use that money to buy another property. This is accessing your equity growth because your property has increased in value. So why this matters is borrowed money is tax-free, but versus capital gains, sometimes you might have 1031 exchange time constraints if you want to sell that property, but accessing that capital to grow your portfolio can really help you scale faster if that's what you're looking to do, or just get more profits in your pocket if you're not using this as a mechanism to grow. This is the forced appreciation on my 36 unit property that I saw in San Diego. So before we implemented the RUBS program, we had about a $7.1 million value on that property. Our income and expense, our NOI, now remember this is before debt, was $321,000. So about a 4.5 cap rate. After RUBS, we could see our income went up by $35,000. Our expenses actually went down in our utilities by about $7,500. We had a total net gain of about $43,000 of additional NOI direct impact. that was a 13% increase in our property value, because that gave us almost $1 million increase just for that $43,000 of additional NOI. So if you think about that, though, that $1 million increase in valuation, we were able to do a cash out refinance through Fannie Freddie. We were able to do a cash out refinance, pull out $500,000, use that money and buy another property, really with no money out of pocket and really no additional capital put into my property. It was just changing the utility responsibility from landlord paid or all bills paid to tenant paid. And really, this was just water, sewer, and trash that we were billing out to our residents. So if you have a phone in front of you, I'd like everyone to get out their calculators. I'm going to give you a quick and easy formula for you to estimate how much value you could potentially create in your portfolio if you're not billing your tenants today and you want to start billing your tenants. So simple formula. Now there's a more detailed formula we'll talk a little bit later on in the presentation, but this is kind of back of the envelope. So everybody count your number of multifamily units. And this doesn't really work as well for single family. Yes, it can work for single family. If the bills are in your name as an owner, you want to make sure you're giving those bills to your tenants. But most of the time in single family, they're signing up with the utilities like the water company and stuff directly. And so this is more for those property bills that can't be easily split. So most of the time, electric, you're already direct connect to your utility provider, but it is, water, they don't have a way of doing that. I'm just going to make sure that I don't have a chat in here. Okay, thank you. All right, so quick calculation, your number of units times that number by 1,000. So in my case, or I'll use this as an example, 100 units times 1,000. So in my case, that would be $100,000. So the $1,000 really represents the amount of money on average you should be able to get back from your tenants or per unit on an annual basis. So water, sewer, trash, it breaks down to about $80 a month per unit. So about $1,000 a unit on average, you'll see. So 100 units times 1,000 equals 100,000. Now divide that by your cap rate. This slide is maybe a little bit older because the cap rates have changed a little bit as interest rates have come up, but we're going to use the 4% cap, but use the cap rate that's kind of traditional for your property. If you don't have a cap rate to use, a good cap rate to use is about 6%. That's about what they're going for right about now with current interest rates. So 100,000 in this example was 4%. So I divided it by 0.04. That's $2.5 million in forced depreciation with no money out of pocket. So if anyone's done the calculation, does anybody want to share what their value, potential forced depreciation in the chat? I'd love to see if anybody has any numbers in the chat that they could put in here. Or if Rama, if you want to put a number in the chat yourself with your portfolio as well, that might be fun to see what your number is as well. Okay, so while you guys are putting those numbers in, I'm going to keep going, but I'm going to come back to see kind of who has had a good amount of value potential within their properties. And if you don't have any units yet, this is great to know. We're going to look at a few deals later on in the presentation on how to look at this when you're buying a property and really how to use this as a buying attribute, which is what we do now. So we use this to evaluate new deals. So this is actually one in San Diego, which we aren't buying in San Diego, but I thought it was a great way of looking at it. So when you're looking at these these are annualized operating financials that are often seen in these offering memorandums. This is an offering memorandum. One thing I always look at is first, I look at the income. Do I see anything in the income that says other income? Do I see anything in the income that says RUBS or utility reimbursement? In this one, I see nothing in here except for income, and gross income, vacancy deduction, nothing. But when you look into the expenses, what do I see? Now, I don't typically touch electric and gas because those are most likely directly connected to your apartment units, unless you have a big older property and you have that master metered, then you could include that. But most of the time, that's not master metered. A few, Texas kind of has a lot of master metered on that, but most areas, that's not a concern. The numbers I'm looking at here are water and trash. And you can see that second line in there, gardener, pest, and fire. Now, I probably wouldn't bill back fire and gardener. I have seen people who bill back their gardening as an amenity fee because they think their tenants are the ones enjoying that. I would say I don't necessarily do that myself, but I have seen people do that. And then the third line down there is sewer. So when you take those numbers together, that's a lot of money. What's that? Water, trash is 40, another probably 5,000 in pest, another 15,000 in sewer. So these are the first things I look at when I look at new deals. Now, let's do the math real quick. So on the top right, we're going to just do the quick math like I just showed you in the last example. 20 units times 1,000 equals 20,000. The cap rate that they actually had, which is crazy in California, was a 2.63. I don't know actually who would buy a property at a 2.63 cap, but I went with their financials on that. And using that number, that shows me about $760,000 in potential forced depreciation. Now I'm going to go back real quick just to show you what that property value is at the top. 6.3 million is what they were asking for this property. So, but when you actually do a little bit longer of a model, I just wanted to give you the numbers here. Let's look at these different line items. So 40,000, 5,000 for pest, 15,000 for sewer. That's actually 60,000. And you can get about 80 to 90% of that back. So this is where the quick model doesn't always work. So in this case, I took 90% of that, which came out to 54,000, which is quite a bit different than the 20,000. And this is a little bit higher. It's often region specific. So San Diego's water sewer rates are extremely high, some of the highest in the nation. And so in those areas where you have very high utility expenses and really high rates, you might want to do the longer model. The 1,000 dollars per unit per year is kind of average across the country. But when I take that 54,000, divide it by the cap rate, then I really see, wow, this property actually has over $2 million in forced appreciation I can create with literally putting no money out of pocket. So it's behoove of you to do the longer model, take the total utilities, times it by 90% or 80% and divide it by the cap rate. But as a quick model, you can always take number of units times 1,000 divided by your cap rate. This is what we do before we even buy a property. One of the first things that we do when we bought here in Florida, as we're transitioning our portfolio out here, is, are they charging for utilities? If they're not charging for utilities, that then is the next, it moves us into the next phase of analysis of like, okay, now let's look at what that analysis is regarding the utilities and how much value we can create. What other value add options can we add here? So we look at this really as our kind of first gate to our acquisition or our buying attributes that we look at on new properties. A question you want to ask yourself as well, and I get this all the time, is, well, I'm at market rate. I include water and sewer in my rent, and I'm at market rate. But one thing I want you to consider is, are you really at market rate? Again, this is something from personal experience. Our same 36 unit property in San Diego, our average rent, and we had utilities included, was about $1,320, and this is probably back in 2011. I think now those are much closer to 2000. But the comps in the neighborhood were about $1,320 as well, but many of those did not include utilities. So with our utilities, we're $3,000 a month. Our utility rates had increased 5 years in a row, and we needed to increase rents really to like $1,400 to cover the cost of our additional utilities. But when market rate is $1,320, how does that really impact your financials? But when you look at it, our $1,320, including utilities, really gave us a net rent of about $1,238, where our competitors were $1,320 they weren't including their utilities, that was giving them a net rent of 1402. And so when you really break it down, are you at market rate? You have to know, what are your competitors doing? And then what's the net rent that you're really getting? Because you can imagine, if I'm trying to rent my apartment for $1,400 and my institutional grade apartment building down the street is advertising for 1320, where's the traffic going to go? The traffic is going to go to the lower rate apartment, because apartments have become commoditized. The rental rates have become commoditized. So if you think about it, years ago, it used to be, what amenities do you have? Everybody was in a rush to make sure that you had a gym and you had a nice common area for your apartment, and you had all these nice amenities, and they were kind of bundled into your apartment. But really, like many other industries, they've become commoditized over the years, and it's not amenities that are the driver anymore. Now it's the price, right? Think about how other industries have done this. Think about the airline industries. They had to unbundle their baggage to remain competitive. Think about the resorts. They had to unbundle their resort fees. So you really have to unbundle your utilities, because the rent rate is the driver, and the utilities or the amenities are not driving the traffic to your properties anymore. So I want to show you a quick case study on how does this impact my residents. I have this good example here. Gary, a growth-focused apartment investor in Seattle with a 500-unit portfolio. He's considering implementing RUBS, but he's worried about the potential resident turnover. He needs to maintain good relations with his bank, keep his occupancy high for lender compliance, and he's reviewed the local utility billing companies, but found high resident complaints and high fees. Some companies refused to work with him because of his small size and required him to wait up to 3 months for a reimbursement. And he was analyzing his options. So worst case scenario, let's say out of his 500 units, that 3% of his tenants moved out, and they moved out for 6 months. I mean, that's highly unlikely, but let's say that they had that vacancy for 6 months. That 15 units times that, my example of 1320 times 6 months, that's $118,000. But when you look at the money that you're getting back from RUBS, the revenue that he's getting is 36,000 times 6 months is an additional 219. So really, the difference is a net effect on revenue is an increase by over $100,000. But when you look at how his portfolio value changed by almost $18 million for really no change, except for changing his tenant responsibility. Here's another deal that we could review, but I don't want to do this one because we already had one quick review, and I want to make sure that I'm good on my time here. But small owners like us, we're pretty underserved. We face a huge technology gap, and we're overlooked by most prop tech companies, despite being the largest segment of the market. We're denied access to technology, but the situation's changing. Utility Ranger, our mission is RUBS to riches. So Utility Ranger, we help apartment owners build boldly and prosper. Apartment owners face commoditization of rental rates, but Utility Ranger, we're a symbol of strength. We're helping the little guy through growth challenges while making it fun and simple to do so, and giving apartment owners tools to navigate these challenges themselves, rather than having to use third-party companies. So I started Utility Ranger. I got a major investment. Half my company was acquired by Grant Cardone and Jaron Yellen with 10X Incubator. That's really been a big growth mechanism for Utility Ranger. Our software is an easy to use billing software that allows landlords to take this function in-house, bill all the fees for additional revenue, making our software essentially free. We charge about $3 per unit per month, and that fee is transferred on to the resident. You can actually add a few dollars more onto that to make another $3, $4 a month on top of it. So it becomes a revenue generation tool as well. You can review the charges within the software and email everything off to your tenants. That also has a payment link to make payment within the platform itself. making it really simple and really reasonable for owners. So picture a day when you happily open your big water bill, knowing your residents are going to pay you back. When your accountant comes to you and says, wow, what are you doing differently? Your profits are up. Picture a day when your extra profits catapult you to the next level. If you want to get started billing your residents for utilities, all asset management summit attendees will get a bonus offer. You'll get lease templates. This will include sample 30-day lease terms, sample notices, 30 lease terms, and sample tenant introductory letters. This will help get you going with your ability to bill for your tenants. Also, we're doing a free property compliance assessment. So this is getting on the phone, going over what are the laws in your specific areas to make sure that you're within compliance and that you can bill in your area. And then we also include free concierge onboarding. So getting your property set up literally takes about 5 minutes on our platform. If you are interested, please scan the code and that will take you to our website where you can do a few things. You can either sign up directly. We're giving a free 60-day trial of our software. No money out of pocket, no long-term contracts. We're a little bit different than the utility billing companies out there today. So there's no long-term contracts. And after 60 days, if you decide you don't want to use this, you don't have to continue. You can remove yourself from the software. I actually haven't had anybody do this yet. Everyone who has started is still on the platform today. We've been around for about almost 2 years now. And it's been growing leaps and bounds, making this really easy for multifamily pros like myself and like you.
Awesome.
So
That's a great case study, and that's another strategy to increase net operating income, right? Thank you for
totally,
sharing that. With that case study, like that's really one of the case studies showed like they increased like almost big amount, right? So without
yep,
like any kind of expenses, right? So
exactly.
yeah, awesome. And thank you very much, Tiffany. Again, great presentation. Anyone interested to increase their net operating income through another simple strategy, so please reach out, Tiffany. Thank you again, Tiffany, for sponsoring the event also. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome.